Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing another episode of our Planet Zoo Mod Spotlights. Can't speak properly. But we're going up to part 80 today, so that's really awesome. I've been kind of putting this off because I've been having issues with the recording software I use. But hopefully this one should come out alright. And we finally get to get part 80. And we've got pretty much all new animals today, so a lot of very cool animals to talk about. Mainly fish, but that's alright. And I'm really excited to talk about all these wonderful guys. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video and keep watching. So we're going to be starting off today with the Longfin bannerfish, or the pennant coralfish, done by Leaf and Buffsu, as we can kind of have a look in here and see. There should be some updates and stuff like that. So these guys are a really cool little fish. The pennant coralfish is their name as well, also known as the longfin bannerfish or the coachman fish. A really interesting group of fish. So these guys, as you can see, they're kind of a smaller size. They reach a maximum length of about 25 centimeters. However, on average, they get about 15 centimeters. And you can see their body is compressed laterally. In other words, that means it's a very tall body. And they have this background color of kind of white with these yellow and black tinges to them. So you can see there's kind of the stripes of black, especially these two black ones, and then there's yellowish tinge to most of their things, including the dorsal, caudal, and pectoral fins. So that's the dorsal, caudal, and pectoral fins. So all of these fins here. You can see their eyes are also white with these black eyes that they've got there, and they've got this black band on their snout as well. Very interesting. And the juveniles actually don't seem to have the second stripe there, and they in any white area that they have as adults. That's been interesting. And these guys, I'm sure you guys have seen a fish similar to this before. They're often confused with the quite similar schooling bannerfish, but the main visual difference between these two species is that the reef bannerfish has kind of the longest snout, and they have darker snouts, and the pelvic fins of the reef bannerfish are more rounded, unlike the bannerfish, as you can see here. They're a little bit more sharp and more angular. So these guys are much more, a little bit more rounded in that regard. Really cool species. So these guys are found pretty much all over the world, and they can be found in tropical and subtropical waters, such as the Indo-Pacific Ocean, such as China, Africa, the Red Sea, Polynesia as well, south of Japan, and also quite common in the Great Barrier Reef. And they typically live in relatively deep waters and protected lagoons, channels, and other reef slopes, and they can live at depths of between 15 to 75 meters deep. So these guys, in terms of their biology, these guys live in pairs, and they feed on zooplankton, so very small microscopic things, in the water column, and they often will also eat benthic invertebrates, so things in the sand and things like that. Juveniles are also solitary and can be seen feeding and cleaning other fish. So very similar to animals such as cleaner wrasse, that they'll have big animals such as like large groupers, even manta rays sometimes come into these reefs, and these little juveniles will come and clean some of the parasites off that. It's a mutualistic relationship they've got going on there. So globally, these guys are considered least concern. So that means they're not really designated as any threat of going extinct. But there are some local populations in decline. And much like other reef fish, they're threatened in the Persian Gulf due to the fact that several reefs have been really damaged and severely fragmented with no continuous coral assemblages just because of habitat destruction, which is very sad. But these guys are really cool. And you can see one of their names, they get the longfin bannerfishes because they have very long fin that they've got sticking up their back there, which is really awesome. Really cool animal there, I gotta say. Really nice. So we're going to be moving on to the next one, also done by Leaf and Buffsu. Most of these are going to be done by Leaf and Buffsu in this video until we get to the last few. But I'll make sure that everyone gets their credit. So we have got here the silver carp. So a really nice guy here. So the silver carp, also known as the Asian carp, is a variety of Asian carp, but not a particular Asian carp. So these guys are a species of freshwater fish. They are found in China and eastern Siberia from the Amur River basin, or drainage, and the north of Zhejiang River, drainage in the south. Although they are a threatened species in their natural habitat, they've also long been cultivated in China And by weight, more silver carp is produced in aquaculture than any other species except for grass carp. So that's very interesting. And they can usually be farmed in polycultures with other Asian carp and sometimes with other fish species, things like that. So these guys are a filter feeder, and they have very many of the special adaptations filter feeders tend to have, as they especially have gill rakers that are fused together in like a sponge-like filter that allow them to filter out water and get at all the tasty little morsels inside. And they also have no stomachs, and they feed more or less constantly on things such as phytoplankton, zooplankton, and detritus. And in places where these guys have been introduced, they often compete with native planktivorous fishes that include bigmouth buffalo, paddlefish, and gizzard shad, and young of pretty much all fish species. These guys, as I mentioned, are a pretty damaging invasive species. And because they feed on plankton, they're sometimes actually used for water control in aquaculture, and especially for blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, which is also very interesting. And sometimes blue-green algae blooms have been exacerbated by silver carp, and it shows that they produce more toxin in the presence of silver carp, which these carp are actually able to eat fine, but a lot of the toxins makes their meat hazardous to eat, so you got to be careful with that. So as I mentioned, these guys live in kind of the natural range. They migrate upstream for spawning, upstream, and eggs and larvae will kind of drift downstream, and then the young fish will hatch in a floodplain with the larval and small juveniles feeding on zooplankton, and they switch to phytoplankton once they reach a certain size. And they are somewhat sensitive to low oxygen conditions, but generally they're doing okay. In terms of their conservation, they're considered near threatened, and in its original range, their habitat and reproductive behavior is really impacted by dams, pollution, and overfishing. And population declines have actually been pretty significant in some places in China, but overall they're doing fine. There is some concern in local areas, but they're not any risk of going endangered. And these guys, as I forgot to mention, these guys are quite a big fish. So typically, they reach lengths of about 60 to 100 centimeters, or 24 to 39 inches, with a maximum length of about 140 centimeters, or 55 inches, and a weight of about 50 kilograms, or 110 pounds. So these guys, they're kind of a sport fishing fish, and people will often try to fish them with dough balls, since they won't take like a lure like most fish would, because they're phytoplankton, eat phytoplankton, things like that. And in terms of their habitat, in their native range, they often will share their kind of habitat with like bighead carp and a large-scale silver carp. But they often will filter larger particles that these guys will eat smaller ones, and they generally eat more zooplankton compared to silver carp. And in the native parts, well, they're not native to the United States, they've been introduced, but they were introduced in the North America in the 1970s for controlling algal growth in aquaculture, and now have become highly invasive, where they live in huge high population densities, and they affect the local environment, including bigmouth buffalo, where they live in the Mississippi, Tennessee, Illinois, South Dakota as well. And there's often sometimes they get the name flying carp because of this, because they tend to leap out of the water, and they can leap up to 10 feet or 3 meters in the air, and boaters have actually been pretty hurt by these guys as they jump around. And this behavior is only seen in their introduced range and not really in their native range, which is very interesting. And there have been some people that have actually hurt themselves pretty badly with these guys jumping out, like hurting themselves, breaking jaws, things like that, because they're quite a large fish, don't forget. And there's even been some hypotheses to why they jump around like this in their native range. And it's believed to be that could be because the introduced North American population may have been, the founding animals of that population may have been particularly jumpy individuals. And obviously, as more and more bred, they might have just developed this jumping behavior more in isolation, which is very interesting. But yeah, really, really cool. Very awesome fish. Also done by Leaf and Buff Sue. Really interesting Asian carp. So next, moving on to kind of, this is not a real species, but this is kind of a breed, which I thought would be really awesome to show off. So here we've got the mirror carp. So these guys are a type of carp that are found in Europe, and they're a variety of your typical common carp, but they're developed into by selective breeding, which is the same way we created things like dogs, cats, horses, domestic cats, horses, cows, things like that. And they get the name the mirror carp because they have these large scales that represent mirrors, and they can grow in excess of 60 pounds. And they're one of the few British fish. The last few British record fish have all been mirror carp, so they're quite big. And the differences mainly between mirror and common carp is that they have largely reduced the presence of these large mirror-like scales on the former. And this mirror scale phenotype, or kind of physical appearance, is actually a genetic mutation which is controlled by two alleles. And the genome coding for these scales are all recessive, so you really have to breed two animals with the same recessive genes to get a mirror carp. So if you bred this with a normal carp or a common carp that has the dominant genes, this won't appear, but it will carry the genes. So you need to have two with two recessive genes to breed and then produce babies that are mirror carp, which is very interesting. And they even have this even regular scale pattern compared to these guys, which is Apache and irregular in comparison. And the lack of scales widely is believed to have been bred by monks, which allows these monks to better prepare them because they don't have to take off so many scales. And contrary to popular belief, the leather carp is not a mirror carp without scales, and there's a distinct genetic difference. And leather carp are permitted to a few scales either along the dorsal line or the wrist of the tail. And leather carp have also been reduced number of red blood cells, which slows their growth. And these guys are actually quite big. They're with the largest known head of the leather at 52 pounds or 24 kilograms. So really interesting fish. Big fan, also done by Leaf and Buffsu, of course. So let's see what we got next here. So we have got the giant Trevally next. Really interesting fish, also done by Leaf and Buffsu, as you can kind of imagine. So this is the giant Trevally. So the giant Trevally, also known as the giant kingfish, the barrier Trevally, for these guys, these are a large species of jackfish, and they are generally found all across tropical waters in the Indo-Pacific region, where they range from South Africa to west of Hawaii, and then include Japan, Australia, and the south as well. And actually, two were documented in the Eastern Tropical Pacific in the 2010s, with one being sighted off the Galapagos and another in the Panama. But there seems to believe that they've actually managed to establish there, which is very interesting. And you can see these guys are distinguished because of this very steep head profile they've got with these strong tail scoots that you can see around the back here. And they're normally a silvery color, which also gets the name, kind of the silver Trevally. And these guys can get black or with black spots eventually. But males actually may grow black once they mature. And they're the largest species of their genus. And they can grow to a maximum size of about 170 centimeters or 76 inches and weigh about 80 kilograms or 176 pounds, where these guys will also inhabit wide ranges of marine environments from estuaries, lagoons, shallow bays as juveniles, and then as they become older, they'll move to deeper reefs, atolls, shallow bays, and larger catchments as adults. And the juveniles of the species are actually known to live in water of very low salinity, such as coastal lakes and the upper reaches of rivers, as they tend to prefer turbid waters as well. So in terms of the ecology, these guys are kind of an apex predator, so they're known to hunt individually or in schools, and they will eat a wide variety of prey that includes crustaceans, cephalopods, and mollusks, which makes up a considerable bit of their diet in most regions. And these guys, also very interesting, these guys employ very novel hunting strategies that include shadowing monk seals to pick off escaping prey, and as well as using sharks to ambush prey. And also footage show from Blue Planet 2 that these guys were hunting terns when fledglings were still learning to fly and crash into the water. These guys would come up and grab them off the top of the water before they managed to escape, so that's also very interesting. And these guys will typically spawn in the warmer months, and they peaks there's different peaking times in different regions. Spawning will typically occur at specific stages of the lunar cycle, with large schools congregating to spawn over reefs and bays, and the reproductive behavior being observed in the wild. And they also grow relatively fast, and they reach sexual maturity at a length of about 60 centimeters at about 3 years of age, so they're quite a big and long-lived fish. So really, really cool in that regard. And the giant Trevally is also a very important species to commercial fisheries and game fish, and also game fish as well. And these species are taken by nets or lures. And the catch statements for the Asian region shows that 4,000 to 10,000 tons, or while about 10,000 pounds of species were taken from Hawaii every year. And the species are considered poor to excellent table fare by different authorities, although there can be issues of Sugatura poisoning. And dwindling numbers around the main Hawaiian islands have kind of put them at risk of extinction there, so there's been a lot of protections in place for these guys. So yeah, very, very interesting fish. Very, very cool. I love the giant trevally. Very interesting. Also done by Leaf and Buffsu. Awesome guy there. So next we're going to be moving on to spotted eagle ray. Very interesting. And now we've got another one done by Leaf and Buffsu. So this is the spotted eagle ray, as you can see here. Very, very wonderful guy. Let's see if we can get one swimming around. Let's have a look at you. Wonderful. So these guys are a cartilaginous fish. That means their bones are made of cartilage and not bone. And these guys, as traditionally recognized, they were found globally in tropical regions, but they have been split in different species. I believe these guys are supposed to be the there's also other populations, but the spotted eagle ray is kind of now restricted to areas such as kind of Indo-Pacific. Wait, no. These guys are typically found more in the Atlantic Ocean. So, and in the other populations, the ocellated ray lives in the Indo-Pacific. So yeah, really shows how taxonomy changes all the time. And these spotted eagle rays, you can see they have quite flat disc-shaped bodies, and with deep blue or black with white spots along their back, so that gives their spotted look. And they have this white underbelly with these fat snouts, as you can see here, that almost looks like a duck's bill, which is really interesting. And the tails are longer than a lot of other rays, and they also have 2 to 6 venomous spines just behind their pelvic fins, as you can kind of see here. Let's see if we can spot it. They don't really show it on this model, but that's okay. And these guys can actually get quite large. Male spotted eagle rays can get up to about 5 meters or 16 feet long, and the largest have a wingspan of 3 meters or 10 feet and a mass of 230 kilograms, so it can get quite large. So in terms of reproduction, once a male will kind of, or a few males find a female they like, they'll pursue her, and then they'll tend to grab her with their pectoral fins, and they put the clasper in the female, and mate for about 90 seconds. And the spotted eagle ray is something called ovoviviparous, which means the eggs are retained in the female and hatch inside her body and feed off the egg sac until they give live birth. And after gestation period of a year, the mother will give birth to a maximum of 4 pups. And when the pups are born, their discs measure about 17 to 35 centimeters or 6.7 to 13 inches across, and they reach maturity at about 4 to 6 years of age. In terms of their diet, these guys typically feed on bivalves, crabs, and lots of other benthic invertebrates and things like that. Also, like hermit crabs, shrimps, octopus, and small fish as well. And they actually have this really specialized chevron shape that allows them to crush hard shells. And the jaws of these rays actually develop calcified struts. And they often help break the shells of these mollusks. And they often will, like, by supporting the jaws and preventing them from breaking. And they also have quite unique behavior by digging with their snouts into the sands of the ocean. And while doing this, they'll have a cloud of sand that surrounds them and spews their gills. And one time they show there's no difference in feeding habits of males and females of rays between Australia and Taiwan. So in terms of behavior, these guys tend to swim in waters between 24 and 27 degrees Celsius, or about 75 to 81 feet, Fahrenheit, I mean. And their daily movements are typically influenced by the tides, with the one tracking study showing that they're more active during high tide. And they also will dig, as I mentioned, dig for snouts in this, dig their snouts in the sand and things like that. And they also exhibit 2 motions with their abdomen and the pectoral fin, where they move rapidly up and down, and they have the pelvic thrust and the extreme pelvic thrust. And this is usually performed by a solitary ray that's repeated about 4 or 5 times. And they're often commonly observed in rays swimming in a group, and they will separate itself by vigorously thrusting its pectoral fins. And they'll often sometimes perform dips and jumps in the water, and they'll dip the ray, will dive, then come back up rapidly, and kind of have all these different ways of potentially communication to each other. And while in shallow water outside their normal swimming areas, they're more commonly seen alone, but they do often congregate in schools. And one form of traveling is they do a loose aggregation, where there's like up to 3 to 16 rays swimming in a loose group together. So in terms of their human interaction, they're quite a common aquarium fish. People can pet them, things like that. And luckily, they are not a targeted fish in terms of fisheries, but they can often be considered bycatch when caught in their nets. And one fact I like to say, for every pound of fish you eat, there's another 5 pounds of bycatch. So that's not very good for local environments, of course. And in terms of their distribution, they're found in quite a large area. These guys are found in coastal waters in the Western Atlantic Ocean, so such as like the United States, Gulf Stream, and Caribbean. Though the other species are found in obviously the Indo-Pacific and the Eastern Pacific, with the ocellated eagle ray and the Pacific white-spotted eagle ray. And in terms of their conservation status, these guys are considered near threatened, and they're mainly caught off Southeast Asia and Africa, different species. And it's kind of the same species in Africa, and they're commonly also common in the commercial marine trade and displayed in aquariums a lot. And although there's been many efforts to protect them, South Africa's decision to deploy fewer protective shark nets has reduced their number because of entanglement. And South Africa has also placed restrictions on the number of rays that can be bought per person per day. And in the US state of Florida, the fishing, landing, purchasing, and trading of spotted eagle rays is illegal. And there have been some zoos breeding them, the ASEA, where they keep a stud book and be breeding them. And they've actually been pretty successful, with over 55 births in the Burgess Zoo, which is very interesting. But yeah, really, really awesome. Nice to see the eagle rays, also done by Leaf and Buff Zoo. And last and most certainly not least for our fishers, we have got the giant oarfish by Leaf and Buff Zoo. So this is a really awesome fish, and it's known by a few names. A couple of the names that it's known by includes the Pacific oarfish, the king of herons, the ribbon fish, or the streamer fish. So these guys are a fish pretty much found all across the world, except for polar regions. And they are one of the longest, world's longest bony fish. And you can see they've got this long shape to them. They have a dorsal fin that goes across their entire length there. That's red there, really interesting. They also have sturdy pectoral fins, and these long oar-shaped pectoral fins, as you can see here. And they get the name kind of the oar because of their oar-shaped dorsal fins, where they get the name. And they have these very interesting colorations, as you can see. They're kind of silvery with these dark spots and this red, crimson fins and all that, which is really interesting. And they swim very differently. They don't swim like this in real life, unlike... It's just because gator works well. But they have this really interesting undulating mode of swimming that makes them... People think that these might be the inspiration for a lot of sea serpent myths, which is very accurate, to say the least, because it looks like a sea serpent. These guys, as I mentioned, found worldwide. They are characterized as ocean dromaeus, and that's where they follow its primary food source and kind of just go where life takes it. And they're thought to inhabit epipelagic or dimly lit mesopelagic zones, and they're really ranging as deep as 1,000 meters below the surface, or 3,300 feet, so very deep sea fish. And they are the longest fish in the world, the longest bony fish. They've been recorded at the length of about 8 meters, or 26 feet. There have been unconfirmed specimens that may get up to about 11 meters, or 36 feet, though they're often commonly measured about 3 feet. And they've actually managed to raise larvae of these guys in captivity. The larvae exhibit like elongated body with rays extending out with the bony fin as well. And actually, unlike the adult form of the species, the skin of a baby is completely transparent, almost. And they have spots of dark coloring along the animal's back. And adults, as you can see, they've got this long ribbon-like shape to them, with the dorsal fin with the entire length between the eyes and tip of the tail. The dorsal fin rays are soft, and they number between 414 to 449. At the head of the fish, the first 10 to 12 of these dorsal ray fins are lengthened, which gives it this really charismatic crest, which is really, really cool. And the pelvic and pectoral fins are nearly adjacent, with the pectoral fins are stubby, as you can see, and the pelvic fins are quite long and ribbon-like, which kind of helps give the name. And they resemble an oar since they've got this little bit of a wider bit at the tip there. And the organs of the giant oarfish are actually concentrated towards the head end of the body, and they're actually able to survive losing large portions of their body, which is pretty interesting. And the liver of these guys is orange to red, and it likely results of asphyxiation and death. And the lateral line begins above the head and below the eyes, and then descends to the lower third of the body, as you can kind of see here. So quite long there. So in terms of their life cycle, much as what is known of the juvenile life cycle, these guys come from artificial insemination work done in labs. And this work was done in 2020 as with the first of its kind, so it's also very interesting. And they noted that larvae are actually very similar to other types of lambidiform larvae, and they face downwards with their pectoral fins. These larvae died within 4 days, so the study really only spanned their early life cycle. But in the field, these guys are known to spawn from June to December, with the resulting eggs being about 2.5 millimeters or 0.1 inches long or large, and they float near the surface until hatching, and they larvae are often observed near the surface during the season as well. So in terms of their behavior, they're not very well known because they live so deep down, we don't really know what their behavior like. But they've observed swimming by means of their dorsal fin and swim in a vertical position. And in 2010, they found a giant oarfish swimming in the Gulf of Mexico, which is very interesting. And that was the first time it's been studied in its natural habitat. And they used the ROV to kind of capture it. And it shows that they kind of swam downwards. And it's just so interesting that we managed to learn so much about this animal. And in terms of their relationship to humans and their conservation, they're not really fish commercially, but they can be occasional bycatch. And due to their long size, elongated bodies, and weird swimming patterns, they have often been responsible or assumed to be responsible for some sea serpent sightings, which obviously is kind of pretty fair considering how they look. And formerly considered rare, they're actually expected to be quite common, though sightings of healthy specimens are not common because we just don't go 1,000 meters down and see them often. Though it's really unusual. And the giant oarfish and the related Arusii are actually named also the earthquake fish because they often surface before and after an earthquake. So if you live near the coast, and sometimes these guys can be a little bit of there's a bit of an earthquake coming. But yeah, really, really cool animal, also done by Leaf and Buffsu. So we're moving on from all these wonderful fishies. Now we're moving on to some land fishies, or reptiles, birds, mammals, etc. So this next one was done by Invincible. We have got the Savannah monitor, which I'm really excited to talk about. Let's look at you, wonderful. So the Savannah monitor is a medium-sized species of monitor lizard that lives in Africa. They're also known as the Bossex monitor, from the French scientist Louis Bosnuc, who first described the species. And these guys, you can see, they're quite stockily built with relatively short limbs and toes, and the skull and dentition is really adapted for their primary food source of really hard-shelled prey, which includes, which I'll get into. You can see they're quite robust with powerful limbs, peg-like teeth, stuff like that, to help with this ecology. And mature, their maximum size is really over a meter. And you can see their skin pattern varies a lot depending on their local habitat's substrate. And they actually have very large body scales, usually less than 100 scales along the mid-body. And they're partly laterally compressed with the double ridge of the nostrils and all that. And they're often confused with their close relative, the white-throated monitor, which can grow to lengths of about 5 to 6 feet. And while similar in overall appearance, these guys are very different in terms of their ecological and morphological differences, which recognize them as different species. So in terms of their diet, these guys are much more restricted than other African land monitors. These guys typically feed on invertebrates that include snails, millipedes, ornithopedans, so things like butterflies, things like that, beetles, and lots of other invertebrates. And it seems these guys in Senegal and Ghana, these guys will feed almost exclusively on mollusks, so that includes snails and arthropods. And in Ghana, also, small crickets actually make up the bulk of diets of animals less than 2 months old. And with moths and scorpions and amphibians actually being more common prey for animals 6 than 7 months old. And mature adults will feed on a large quantity of snails. And you guys know your giant African land snails. There's a lot of them around in Africa, of course, and these guys have evolved to eat that. which is really interesting. And full grown of these guys have teeth that are quite blunt that allow them to crack open the eggs of, not the shells of these snails. And the jaws have also evolved to put the maximum leverage at the back of the jaws so they can crush these shells. So in terms of reproduction, these guys typically dig a deep hole in the substrate in which lay about 40 or more eggs. We'll have a look at the babies while we're talking about these guys. Look at how cute these little mans are. So they'll typically lay 40 or more eggs, and they hatch after about 156 to 160 days. Hatchlings will start feeding a few days after the yolk sac has been absorbed, which can take more than 12 days for some. And in terms of their native range, they typically live through sub-Saharan Africa from Senegal to Eastern Sudan and south along the almost to the Congo River, where they're replaced by the white-throated monitor. These guys are also a ground-dwelling species, so they typically live in burrows, though they can be found in bushes and low trees sometimes. And in coastal plains, these guys will often live in the giant burrows of like giant crickets and things like that. So in terms of their threats, these guys are considered least concern, but they're hunted for their leather and meat in terms of for people's consumption, but they're also part of the international pet trade, and that goes into captivity. So these guys are the most common species of monitor lizard available in the pet trade, accounting for almost half of the entire international trade of live monitor lizards. And despite this prevalence in the pet trade, they actually don't really reproduce very well. And a high mortality rate exists in their captive population, with adult specimens often come unwanted pets, and they're reported to being the most common monitor lizard by animal rescue agencies, and also their skins are traded and things like that. But the reason mostly this is partly because these guys are so specialized. These guys like to eat a lot of invertebrates, and most reptile people mainly breed rats and things like that, and they try to feed them on rodents, and they get too fat and they don't breed. It'd be really interesting if someone managed to start breeding giant African land snails for adults and really create something profitable off that. That would be interesting. I would totally do that if I could, but obviously can't do that where I live. But in terms, other than that, they're considered least concern. And actually, in terms of the imports, there's about 30,000 live specimens exported to the US every year. And from 2000 to 2009, there was 2 imports, and lots of them, about 30,000 animals, along with products made by these guys, include just anything made from their skin, things like that. And they were worried about the unsustainable trade in Sudan, Nigeria, and places. But overall, they're considered least concern because they just have such a wide range. Yeah, really, really awesome. Done by Vincible, who did a really wonderful job. So next, second to last, but certainly not least, we have got a cute little rat here, done by Leaf and Nicholas Lionrider. We have the North Luzon Giant Cloud Rat. Really, really awesome little guy here. Is this a juvenile? We're going to have a look at the adults. Where's an adult? The adults are smaller, I think. Oh, wait. Oh, there we are. Here's an adult. So the Northern Luzon Giant Cloud Rat, or the Northern Luzon Slender-tailed Cloud Rat, is a large species of rodent in the family Muridae, so that's a type of mouse or a rat. These guys are quite large, though. These are a large rodent. They get about 1.9 to 2.6 kilograms, or 4 to 5 pounds, and about 75 to 77 centimeters, or 29 to 30 inches long, which is pretty big. That includes the tail as well, and you can see they have this relatively long pelt here that also covers the tail, but they're usually more pale grey with some darker brown patches as well, and they often have a black mask and collar, but they can often be entirely white as well. And these guys are only found in northern and central parts of Luzon in the Philippines, and found in about 12 or so provinces. The northern Luzon giant cloud rat prefers forests and scrub, but they also like plantations as well and other degraded habitats. They often occur from sea level to altitudes of about 2,200 meters, and there's some overlap with the rarer giant or bushy-tailed cloud rat, but these guys are much more common. In terms of behavior, these rats are nocturnal, and they feed on various types of vegetation, and because they're large size, they don't often fall into these small mammal traps, and there's been limited research on these guys since they're a bit big. And In terms of reproduction, these guys often live in pairs or with one or two dependent young, and they will give birth in hollow bores in trees, either standing or fallen trees, and then burrow into the ground. And the sperm head of these guys actually have a short hook, and these guys, very interesting, just have quite big sperm, which is another fun fact. In terms of their conservation status, these guys are considered least concern, and actually some parts they're considered a pest because of the extensive damage that they do to crops. And they're mainly hunted for food, but they have been extirpated for some reasons of Luzon because of hunting. And it overall appears that these guys can withstand that and generally remain common and widespread. So they're doing okay at the moment, but they have been lost to some areas. A really, really awesome animal, I think. Really cute little rat. So, last but most definitely not least, we got something cool from the latest conservation pack. We have got here the Lara Gibbon by Leaf, also known as the Whitehanded Gibbon. So I'm going to let these guys climb up and swing around. So these guys are an endangered primate and kind of one of those really interesting gibbons. They're the kind of the second largest gibbon, second only to the siamang. You can see these guys have a fur coloring that varies from black to dark brown to light brown sandy colors, and they have these white hands, which I get the other name, the white-handed gibbon. And both male and females will often have all color variations, and these sexes don't very differ much in size. And these guys are also true brachiators, so they, like other gibbons, they will swing their arms to kind of climb around, which is pretty awesome, to be honest. And reflecting on this, they kind of move around and stuff like that. So that's why they have such extremely long arms. And with all apes, these guys only have kind of, like, they've lost the functional tail there. They don't really have a tail. Let's see if you'll swing around. And they actually have a tough, bony padding on their buttocks, which is called the ischial callosities, or sitting pads, that allow them to sit on a tree and not hurt their butts, which is another cool little fact. So these guys also, another claim of fame for these guys, they have the largest range of any gibbon, or the greatest north to south range. They were found historically in Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand, and they even range historically into southwestern China and to Burma as well, south of the whole Malay Peninsula and all that. And they're also present in the northwest portion of Sumatra, though in recent decades, due to lots of large-scale deforestation and things like that, it's kind of really impacted them. And including in Japan, they're pretty much considered to gone extinct or very close to it. But in terms of their general habitat, they tend to live in lowland forest or even highland forests and mountain deciduous bamboo forests. Pretty much found a little bit everywhere. They're very generalized in that regard. And the gibbon genus is highly allopatric, and they're usually separated by large rivers. And the result, the range extends from Myanmar, but only to the Salween River. They're also found through the Malay Peninsula, and the Lara gibbons exist west of the Mekong River and northeast in Laos. And these guys can be found with other species of gibbons and monkeys and langurs and stuff. So they clearly get around a little bit. Let's see if you're going to... No, you're not going to swing. I want to see you swing. Now, you're going to be good and swing for me. Come on, be good and swing for me. You know you deserve it. But in terms of their diet, these guys are considered frugivores. So they typically eat mostly fruit. It's about half of the diet. They'll also eat leaves, insects, flowers, and a lot of other small things. In the wild, they'll eat figs, sweet fruits, berries, as well as young leaf buds, shoots, insects, including wasps. And they'll even eat birds' eggs, which is very interesting. Well, let's see if we can get one to climb. I want to see one climb around, but we'll just have to wait. And during the summer months, when these figs and leaves are not as available, these guys will eat more insects, and often in the winter, which is pretty cool. And in terms of their behavior, these guys are diurnal, so they typically come out during the day, and they will live in rainforests and be arboreal, so they live up in the trees, which is very interesting. I'm trying to see if they'll brachiate for me. No, they won't. Very silly. Anyway, these guys are typically active for about 8 to 9 hours a day, where they leave their sleeping sites and kind of go around sunshine and enjoy sleeping in trees for average about 3 hours before sunset. These guys will spend most of their day feeding, traveling, resting, and socializing and vocalizing with each other. And the actual portion activities can change significantly over the course of the year, just depending how they're feeling, really, which is quite interesting. And they really come to the ground. Instead, they spend most of their lives in the trees, climbing around, brachiating. And they often use the hook hands, so they can swim quite well. And in terms of their social organizations, these guys are typically dominated by a monogamous pair. There we are, he's brachiating. Awesome. That's how gibbons do move. So, as I mentioned, these guys will spend most of the day swinging around like that. And in terms of their social organization, they live in a monogamous family with one breeding male and one breeding female living with the offspring. And with an offspring reaching sexual maturity, they leave the pair and leave the fallow unit. But actually, this kind of concept of these guys living in these monogamous pairs is kind of shown this is a little bit more plastic than that. And long-term studies have shown that it's actually flexible. That includes extra pair copulations, partner changes, and polygamous groupings. So this multiple polyandry may be attributed to cooperative territory use and female defense. And as this range size increases, males are more successful in depending a pair or group. And sometimes these extra pair copulations may increase the chances of reproduction with a mate with superior genetic quality and decrease the chances of infanticide. So though they typically live in monogamous pairs, there is some kind of exceptions to the rule, just like people, like you could say. And in terms of family groups, they live in this firm territory where they kind of ward off other gibbons with their calls. And they often have this great call that's like a duet between the breeding pair to say, hey, I'm here. And each breeding pair will have the unique call and stuff like that. And they'll even have short hoots and things like that to communicate with each other. And they have all sorts of different calls that they're used to terminate species differences among the gibbons. And also they've also evolved to communicate in terms of predation. So in terms of a presence of like a tiger, a clouded leopard, an eagle, or a python, they will have a call that's more like a sharp wow effect than their normal duets. It's like, hey, there's a predator here, get out of here, kind of the thing. But yeah, we'll have a look at the babies with as we talk about reproduction. So let's see if we can find the little baby. Where's the baby? There he is. He's sleepy. No, he's sitting down. What a funky little man. So sexually, they're very similar to other gibbons. Mating can occur every month of the year, but they mostly will be breeding in the dry season of March, with births appearing about the late rainy season, about October. And on average, females reproduce for their first time at about 11 years of age, but typically this is actually much later in captivity. Gestation is about 6 months long, and pregnancies, they usually give birth to a single baby. And the young are nursed for approximately 2 years, and they reach full maturity at about 8 years. And these guys have quite a long lifespan. These guys in the wild are believed to live up to 25 years, and obviously in captivity, often they can live much longer. So in terms of conservation, these guys face a lot of conservation issues, though. We can talk about that a little bit. So they're often threatened because they're hunted for their meat. Sometimes the parent is killed to capture young animals as pets. But the biggest impacts to these guys is often the loss of habitat. So these guys like to live in forests. Obviously, they don't like coming to the ground. They like climbing in the trees. But as people chop down the trees, that destroys this habitat. And often this forest clearance is caused by things such as building full roads, ecotourism, cattle and elephants, agriculture, forest fires, logging, illegal logging, palm oil plantations, and village settlements, which is obviously destroying a lot of their rainforest habitat, which is very, very sad, but that's why they are considered sadly endangered. But there is obviously some captivity, and I believe the population's within a few thousands, so they're not at danger of extinction yet, but there is some very serious things that people need to be careful of. But yeah, really, really awesome. So I think this will be a great place to end the video. Leaf, you did a wonderful job with these gibbons. I'm a big fan. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.